7 C's because we do culture, change, communications and coaching. And our organisational values are courage, compassion and creativity. And we thought, that says something that's ripe for a marine-based metaphor. And so that's what we're going to bring you today, is a marine-based metaphor, which really what we're doing is we're sharing some thinking from work we've done with a variety of our clients. And you can see some of their logos on the screen. How do we make culture feel accessible for everybody in an organisation? How do we talk about a culture in a way that sort of demystifies it and makes it possible for everyone to play their part and gives us some tangible ways to actually affect change? That's what we're talking about. Was anybody expecting to hear about hybrid working? Because I did just hear Joe say something there. No? Everyone good to talk about culture for the next 15, 20 minutes? Great, let's go. Good. Okay. So I guess the question we're sort of trying to answer is this. Why does culture feel so nebulous sometimes? And I hosted a campfire chat upstairs. There was no campfire, spoiler for those of you who didn't make them. No one was set alight. There were no marshmallows. But I did do a hosting of a campfire chat earlier. And one of the things that everyone said to one degree or another was, it kind of feels like the leadership and people managers and the organisation look at the people team and the comms team as if culture, that's your job, right? You understand it. And it does feel a bit nebulous, I think, but to affect change in it, everyone needs to see it as something meaningful and achievable. And I guess to understand why it feels a bit nebulous, I'm going to go back to some models that I learned when I was first doing my master's and that lots of us who are culture geeks rely on. So the first thing you've got here is Charles Handy and his handy 4-box grid. You may recognise that. The next thing you've got is Edgar Schein, good old Edgar Schein. And if it's not a 4-box grid, it's a pyramid. We all recognise these as cultural models, ways of looking at culture. And we might also recognise this one. This is Gert Hofstede and his incredibly simple floral octagram. Is it any wonder, really, that engaging your finance director or your frontline operational managers on the topic of culture can sometimes feel a little bit tricky? Why do we have to go and make things so complicated? This was just a reason to put Avril Lavigne in for those of us who were born, before 1980, I guess. We do make it sound quite complicated. And I guess we've got these complex organisational psychology models that they don't really land outside the people team or the specialist OD teams. And in a way, it sort of feels like we're gatekeeping. We kind of like that in a way. It makes us sound important and knowledgeable and experts in our field, but it's a barrier to other people really understanding culture and therefore doing something about it. And what happens then is that people who need to be in the camp, they're afraid of getting involved because they don't really understand it. These models look quite complex. And then out in the media, people are talking about culture as if it's a flipping, terrifying thing. They're talking about toxic culture. So the stakes feel really high. And what do we do when it feels complicated and the stakes feel high? We go looking for a nice one and done hack. What's something that I can do tangibly that feels like it might have something to do with culture? Maybe I rebrand. Maybe we get some new values and we put them on the wall. Maybe I do a training course. But we're looking for nice, simple answers, right? I'm seeing some heads nodding, so hopefully this is resonating. Okay. This is my next musical reference. And those of you who know me will know that I'm not afraid of a musical reference. If any of you know who this lady is, yes. So we need to calm down. We need to calm it down a little bit if we're going to talk to people outside of the specialism about culture. So what I'm going to invite you to do, I'm just going to test who's actually listening to me. And I'm going to ask you to just close your eyes for a minute. Okay. And I want you to just imagine that you are in a deep blue ocean. And in that deep blue ocean, there are 2 fish and they're happily swimming along. And the other way, they see a larger, older, more experienced fish swimming towards them and they meet him. And he looks at them and he says, he nods or whatever fish do. And he says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" They kind of nod at him and they swim on. And a little while on, one of the younger fish looks at the other younger fish and says, "What the heck is water?" You can open your eyes now. Thank you for going with me. It's not my metaphor, but that's culture. That's how we think about culture. We swim around in it every day. We know it happens. It's there supporting us, impeding us. We get caught along in the currents and the riptides of it. But naming it and describing it, some of us aren't even aware that we're in it, right? What the heck is water? So if you want to understand the water that you swim in, you need a model for talking about it. And at 7Cs, it won't surprise you to learn that it's a marine-based metaphor that we use, but we like a metaphor. So we talk about culture as an ecosystem. And to be able to understand your ecosystem, you need to be willing to do a little bit of deep sea diving. That's what we're going to talk through in a minute. So just to explore very briefly what I mean by doing a deep sea dive, a deep cultural dive, if you haven't caught the reference there, that's where I'm getting at, right? Puns and marine-based metaphors, Taylor Swift references, that's what we're all here for, hopefully. Okay. So a deep sea dive is just a really simple way of saying, in a very clear way to people who aren't culture experts, what are we really talking about? And therefore, what's my part in it? Okay. So let's start off with the really obvious stuff. And this is deliberately in very simple language, because I think that one of the things we do to gatekeep is we overcomplicate language around culture. So it's deliberately very simple. One of the first things that we might want to look at when we're talking about what is the water like around here, what's our culture like, is what do people say about us? What do our customers say? What do our employees say? And what's the press, social media saying, for example? Both the stuff that we engineer and that we want to hear and the stuff that we don't. That's a good indicator. And it's often the thing that gets the attention of people, right? Because it's the external perception of our brand. And we might also be concerned with what we say. So this is both the formal stuff. This is the brand that we're trying to cultivate, what we tell people when they're joining us, our employee value proposition, what we say in corporate communications. But our cultural water is also made up of the stuff that is informal, those water cooler conversations, what we say in emails and how we say them, what we say in one-to-ones, what we're saying in meetings and town halls and so on and so forth, in Teams chats between people. And those things might not be congruent. They might not line up. We might say one thing outside, we might say something else internally. And then there's how we choose to say it. What's the mediums and mechanisms we're using to communicate with our people? We might have wonderful things that we're saying, but we're not delivering them in a way that is culturally congruent. And I'll give you a very live example. We're working with an organisation at the moment who have got 80% of their people are out in the field. And they've been wedded to email as a form of communication. They cannot work out why nobody is engaging with corporate communications. And there's some practical barriers as well as some cultural barriers here, right? I don't have time to do that. I also don't have a device to do it on. These are practical things, but it's a cultural indicator. And one of their values is we're in it together. So I'll leave the you to fill in the gaps. What we say and how we say it. This is another obvious one, and we talked a lot about this in the campfire chat upstairs. Our leaders are a cultural indicator. So the behaviour of our leaders. Your leaders are like the big sharks or seals swimming around in your marine cultural ecosystem, casting a really big shadow. What's their behaviour like? What are they focused on? What do they recognise and reward? What do they say in public? What do they say in private? Who are they? What do they look like? Do they all look the same? Are they homogenous? Any marine-based scientist will tell you that a homogenous ecosystem is not a healthy ecosystem. Do those leaders understand their role in culture? Do they understand what they're doing? Are they self-reflective enough to draw the dots between what we say we are externally and how I'm acting day in, day out, whether eyes are on me or not, whether I'm with one person or hundreds of people? So what are our leaders doing and how are we consciously managing that? How we treat our people, I suppose it's a very small bubble that essentially sort of wraps up everything that if you're in the people and HR and culture teams might fall under your people strategy. So every strategy you have within the people team as to how we actually treat them, but it's only a small part of that ecosystem. And what very often happens in organisations is we have a very well-meaning and very well-structured people strategy. And then what happens when the waters get choppy? What happens when the rubber meets the road? What happens out on shift in the middle of the night? So that gap between what we say we do with regards to our people and what we actually do, at 7Cs we call that the say-do gap. And when you're doing a deep sea dive, you're looking for those say-do gaps. You're looking for the difference between what we say we are to the world and what's actually happening on the ground. Makes sense so far? But there's one last piece that if you're really going to do a complete exploration of your cultural ecosystem that I think is ripe for exploration, and we quite rarely go digging around in it, particularly if you're in comms or the people teams, because we don't see this bit as being our preserve. And that bit is what I like to call, rather generously, our ways of working. That's your office environment. It's your IT setup and infrastructure. It's your processes, your systems, your policies. These are things that have an impact on your culture and your cultural ecosystem day in, day out. I like to think of them as seaweed. Seaweed in an ocean has got a real purpose. It's there to nurture the life in it. But if there's too much of it in the wrong place, you can get tangled up in it, right? So what is it about your ways of working that nurtures and supports or impedes your ecosystem? Is it feeding the creatures in your ecosystem with really good oxygen and energy to do their job? Or is it unintentionally holding you back? And the thing about our ways of working is that the people who are guardians of those things don't see themselves as guardians of culture. And yet it's those things that the people who are impacted by culture, our customers and employees, very often will tell you they're most frustrated by. They'll say, this 27-step expenses approval process is painful, it's not agile, one of our values, and it doesn't feel like you trust me, another of our values. Good say-do gap there, right? But nobody ever considered it to be an indicator of culture. So if you're doing a deep sea dive, you're looking in those little rock pools as well, right? You're looking for that stuff. And what you're also doing is using a framework that helps people who own those systems, processes, ways of working to know if you're responsible for our facilities, you're a guardian of our culture. If you're responsible for a process or a system that enables or impacts or touches our people, you're a guardian of our culture, because guess what? We all are. We all are. So, okay, I've probably scared the bejesus out of you now. You think this is all very well. I'm getting lots of nods, but it sounds blinking terrifying going digging around in this particular ecosystem. So if you're going to go and ask these questions, do this kind of exploration, you might want to be thinking about some buoyancy aids or life rafts to deploy if you're going to be going on a deep sea dive. Those two metaphors don't stack up, I've just realised, but stick with me. So some principles really that help if you're going to be looking in your cultural ecosystem. This is the first one that's really important. There is no one and done when it comes to culture. If it's an ecosystem, it's not finished. It's continually evolving. We've lots of conversations today on various stages and up in the campfire talks about how we work with culture through change and communications, through transformation. And change and transformation is a bit of a cliche now, but it is now a constant in organisations, which means that culture needs to continually adapt and evolve, hence the ecosystem. So it's ongoing. It's also everyone's job. Everyone in an organisation is a guardian of culture. It's not something to be kept in a hallowed hall by the people in culture team. And even if we have to call it something else, I spoke to one of the speakers in the speakers lounge earlier on, and she said, I banned the word culture. I banned it. We don't talk about it in that way because it feels too nebulous, back to my original point. So the third thing is, now these next 2 points are quite tricky. The first is to stay curious, right? So be continually looking for, what's under that little rock? Oh, why did that thing happen? What's going on there? You know the difference between curiosity and frustration or resentment or judgment, right? Curious is like kind of scientific exploration. Like, why is that happening? Because we need to encourage everyone, if it's their responsibility to go deep sea diving, then people need to be able to talk about the way things are around here, describe the water, the temperature of it, how easy it is to breathe, without any judgment. We need to hear that feedback without any judgment. People need to be able to give that feedback and make those observations without judgment, which means that nowhere's off limits. Hard stuff, right? But these are good guardrails to be going deep sea diving. And I would say, because I imagine most of you are now thinking, oh, crikey, how do I tell the chief executive that he does this one thing? It's as much about finding the pearls in your ecosystem as it is about looking for toxic spillages, right? And sometimes finding those pearls and developing those pearls, looking for more of them, highlighting them, will actually address some of those toxic spillages themselves. I had a conversation with somebody earlier on who was saying, well, how do I stop these leaders who are really barriers to our cultural transformation? I said, maybe you don't. Maybe you change the ecosystem around them and the ecosystem will take care of it. You know, the ecosystem that's supporting bad behaviour in corners, toxic spillages, right? So the ecosystem, if you tend to it, will take care of the creatures that maybe don't need to thrive there. Okay, so what? This is the bit that I really want to kind of land. So we need to think about this as continual nurturing and guardianship. It's not one big dredge. We're not doing one big program here. This is an ongoing, everyone's job to tend and nurture to our culture. But sooner or later, you're going to gather a lot of data and you're going to come up with lots of ideas. Everyone's got a view as to how we address this. Everyone's got thoughts as to how we might do it. And at 7Cs, we kind of like this matrix. Again, it's not ours. We borrowed it, but I really like talking to clients about it. Thinking about things in terms of the level of effort you need to put in. And that effort could be manpower, it could be cost, it could be time, it could be resources, and the impact that that intervention or activity is actually going to have on your cultural ecosystem. So we spend a lot of time, particularly in the people team and sometimes in comms, on what I like to call the high effort, low impact stuff, right? It's the sexy stuff. The rebrands, some might sit here if that's not going to solve anything. The values on a wall with a really sexy marketing agency might sit there if it's not going to solve how the leadership team behave in their meetings. So they're vanity projects, they're low impact, they're high effort. And it's hard to steer clear of them, but we need to recognise that we do. We also spend quite a bit of time here because it can feel a bit overwhelming. So we go looking for the low-hanging fruit, and sometimes that low-hanging fruit's not ripe. It's not going to make an impact. It's just easy. You know, we can do a poster and put it on the wall. We can do some e-learning. That's nice and easy. Get it out, make it mandatory. Tick the box. Low effort, low impact. Sorry to inform you. So we do those things because we're worried about this stuff, really, that we know is really going to have an impact. We know it because we know our organisations, but it's high effort. And that's the stuff that, yeah, they're like Mars missions, right? We don't need to do too many of them, and we need to plan for them, and we need to get a body of support around them. But that is not where you start. You start here. You start with the low impact, low effort, high impact stuff. And I had a really great conversation with Kate from Norton Rose, and some of you may have heard her chat earlier on about the way that she took cultural evolution from values and behaviours and made it real for people. And when I was talking to her in the speaker's room, she was saying, you know, we did the simple things. We noticed that we talk about inclusivity, but we only celebrate the partners publicly. So we started celebrating everybody when they get promoted, right? Because that's more aligned to our culture. Simple, easy, low effort change had a big impact in their employee engagement scores. Another low effort, high impact intervention, if you're not already doing it, and you can do this across the whole organisation, is greater involvement of people in co-designing solutions and projects, greater employee voice in a problem from the beginning. So we work with an NHS trust, and we actually invited the whole of their workforce to collaborate in designing their behaviours. I believe Kate from Norton Rose did the same thing, and that's what she was talking about. So we invited everybody to talk about what it's like around here and what are our organisational behaviours that we're signing up to and how do we shape them. And involving them allowed them to be part of the conversation and also part of the solution. But that works on every scale. It doesn't have to be a cultural conversation. It could be the transformation. You could be thinking, well, how are we going to get people to start to be more innovative and more collaborative as part of our transformation? Well, are you involving them in designing it in the first place? So employee involvement and listening is a low effort, high impact activity, but it's not the only one. And the clues to that will really sit in what you learn from your deep sea dive. They'll be unique to you. And that was another takeaway that we heard on the table this morning, was actually this is really unique to your organisation. There's no hack that I'm going to stand up here and give you a magic bullet for. You need to gather the data, and your people will tell you, if you're listening well enough, what those low effort, high impact things actually are. So the principles, I guess, if I could give you a few things to take away: don't gatekeep culture. Make it simple and make it for everyone. Think of it as a whole ecosystem and then invite people to dive in, knowing that they are part of each and every corner of that ecosystem. Think about that as a continual nurturing of that ecosystem and involve people, listen to them. Think high impact, low effort, first of all.